What's up everyone and welcome back to another Reddit Stories video. Today I've got a truly bizarre story to share. I really enjoyed this story and I hope you do too. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate each and every one of you. If you haven't already, please give the video a like and hit that subscribe button. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers and I know we can get there with your support. Alright, no more waiting. Let's get into it.
I took something from the forest. Now it wants to take something from me. I thought it wasn't a big deal. My son is on a rock collecting kick. Well, collecting is being generous. He's just digging up the most random, boring, uninteresting rocks and putting them in a box. I've offered to buy him a collection of gemstones or whatever, but apparently the act of digging them up is the whole point. Our backyard looks worse than when our dog, Sadie, dug up everything that one summer. Holes everywhere. Well, today, Ben wanted to bring his shovel to the local state park and dig up some. I wasn't sure if it was legal to take rocks from a state park. It probably wasn't. But we weren't taking things of value, you know? It's not like we were panning for gold or digging up fossils. We were just stealing average, completely uninteresting rocks. We hiked out about half a mile on the main trail, then spent an hour filling up his backpack with rocks. It was good for us to get exercise, to be out in the fresh air. As we started for the parking lot, however, I had a weird feeling. Maybe it was just the heavy backpack digging its straps into my shoulder, but I felt a sort of weight pressing down on me. A random anxiety out of nowhere. It was difficult to describe. It didn't quite feel like a panic attack, or impending doom, or being watched. It felt sort of like a cross between the three. Like something was just wrong. Like the natural order of things was disturbed. A disturbance in the force, if you will. But that was ridiculous. It would be bad ecologically to take dumpster truck loads of soil from the forest to use in your garden. Or cut down a whole bunch of trees. But to take a small backpack full of rocks from a 100-plus acre state park? How bad could that be, really? Depends on who you ask, I thought, as we hiked uphill. To the grubs and the microbes who lived under that rock, very bad. To the rest of the forest, unnoticeable. I followed Ben's little form up the hill, panting now. The trees stretched up around me. I turned back to see the empty forest, the babbling brook, the trail winding behind a hill. It just felt wrong, like I was bringing bad luck on us or something. I shook the thought out of my mind. We made it to the car and I hauled the backpack inside. Then we drove out of the parking lot. In the middle of the road stood a deer. It stared at us with its dark eyes, unmoving. The road was narrow, so I couldn't go around it without risking hitting it. I pressed the horn for a second, letting out the tiniest beep to startle it. An ear twitched. "I've never seen a deer this close before," Ben shouted from the back seat. "Wow." It looked like it was silently judging me. I lay on the horn harder. The deer finally moved, and slowly, made its way across the road. We woke up sick the next day. "Those fucking Lowrys," I told my husband. "They're always sick." The kids had a play date 2 days ago. No doubt that's where we picked it up. Ben stayed home from school. We set up cartoons in the family room, lots of blankets. I brought my laptop over to try to get some work done, even though I was feeling pretty bad myself. My husband left for work. Colds, for me, always start with a sore throat, but this one felt different. I was getting chills, my eyes were watery, I was stuffed up, and every so often I'd get a sudden wave of nausea. "How are you feeling, buddy?" I asked. "Nauseous? Tired?" He nodded, looking pretty bad. A few minutes later, another one of the nausea waves hit. I started for the bathroom, then redirected as I realized I wasn't going to make it. I vomited in the sink. The awful, projectile kind, where your entire body is convulsing and you can't do anything to stop it. More and more vomit. Tears ran down my cheeks. And then, as I was coughing, I felt something strange coming up my throat. Something solid, like I'd swallowed a stone. Before I could fully process it, my body convulsed, and the thing shot out of my mouth. It looked like some sort of vegetative matter sitting in the bottom of the sink. The convulsions stopped. I grabbed a paper towel and wet it, wiping down my face. I reached out and poked the mass. It stuck together like it hadn't been digested at all. I flipped it over, and it was dark brown on the bottom. An earthy smell, like soil after a rain, mixed with the acrid smell of vomit. What the hell? Last night I'd had a salad. I'd had half of a bagel today before the nausea started. Neither of those things could really describe what I saw in the sink, unless I somehow hadn't digested the salad well. But then it would have looked like lettuce. This looked almost like moss. I rinsed it down, drank some water, and went back out to Ben. He looked like he was about to fall asleep. Feeling a little better, I sat down at the laptop and tried to get some work done. In the hazy gray of pre-dawn, a deer stood in our backyard. It was a buck, stately antlers attached to its head piercing the mist. Don't deer only have antlers in the fall? I thought vaguely, still half asleep. Ben had woken up and I'd measured out some kid's Advil for him. Now he was settling back to sleep, and I had nothing to do but look out the window. I didn't want to use my phone and let the blue light wake me up. I watched as the deer stood there, motionless. We'd only had deer in our backyard a few times before. I knew they were crepuscular, active at dawn and dusk. So I guess this guy was looking for breakfast or something. But then he moved, and I realized just how wrong I was. He started walking towards the woods, but everything about his movements was wrong. It almost reminded me of a bipedal creature, forced to walk on all fours. His rump higher than his shoulders, his back legs too long, bent too much, awkwardly hobbling towards the woods. I ran over to the window, but it was still so dark out. The deer slowly ambled to the woods, spindly, two long legs bending weirdly. My stomach turned. Nothing about this looked right. Then he disappeared. It took me a long time to fall asleep after that. "How are you feeling?" "Terrible," I told my husband, drinking some hot tea. The sore throat had now kicked in, and it felt like I could barely swallow. Ben actually seemed to be doing a bit better than me today. He was able to make it out of bed and was sitting on the rug, playing with his cars. "Ben seems better." "I know. Thank God for that." "I guess it makes sense you feel worse," he said, gesturing to me. "How's the nausea?" "A little better." Then I told him about the deer, but it was hard to describe how weird it looked with words. The dread I felt in my stomach while I watched it. "It was probably injured and limping or something," he replied. "Or maybe it had that, chronic wasting disease, where the deer look like zombies." I guess that made sense. By midday, I was vomiting again. This time, something slimy and long dribbled out of my mouth. I pulled at it to find a long, yellowed fiber, like a strand of long grass. The seed head was broken open, and a black fungus bloomed over it. It was time to call a doctor. "Do you have any history of pica?" "Pica?" "Eating non-food items, like the grass you described in your vomit." I shook my head. "Do you sleepwalk?" "Not that I know of." "Normally I wouldn't be that concerned, but given your condition..." He trailed off with a half smile. "I'll get in touch with your doctor." He continued asking me questions, but nothing was really leading anywhere. I'd brought the piece of grass with me in a baggie, and he looked at it. Food contamination, pica while sleepwalking, random things brought up that I knew weren't right. Something terrible was going on, and it had to do with those fucking rocks. The deer. The vomiting. We had taken something from the forest, and it was retaliating. I wasn't a superstitious person. Maybe it was my sleep deprivation and how awful I was feeling and my current brain fog. But I became obsessed with the thought that it was the rocks doing this. We'd upset the natural balance. We'd angered something. They were worthless to us, but valuable to the forest. After Ben fell asleep, I bagged up all the rocks and drove out to the edge of the woods. My husband offered to come with me, but I refused, saying I was just getting some milk at the Quick Mart. I didn't want him to think I was crazy. I hauled the rocks into the car and drove to the state park. The main entrance was closed for the night, of course, but the forest extended right to the edge of the road. I pulled over on the shoulder and hauled the bag out of the car, dropping it onto the curb. I zipped the bag open and, one by one, began hurling the rocks into the woods. There were 7 in total. I heard the rocks soaring through the air, breaking branches with it. Snap, snap, snap. Then a thwack as it landed on the ground. 2. This was a big one, but I was able to lift it a few feet off the ground and sort of toss it a few feet beyond the tree line. It made a heavy clunk sound, as it, presumably, collided with another rock on the ground. 3. This one was small, and I gave it a wicked pitch, sailing through the air. Snap, snap, snap. Then, nothing. I stood there confused. It shouldn't have met the ground that soon. Unless it hit something. Z-zeep. Something sailed past my ear. Thwack. The rock I'd thrown in moments before whizzed past my ear, hit the side of my car, and dropped to the ground. I stared at it, my heart pounding. Someone's out there. Oh no, no snapping branches. Growing louder and louder, I dove back into the car and slammed the door shut. The engine revved and I pulled away from the curb, leaving the backpack full of rocks where it sat. I swerved onto the road. A deer came bounding out of the woods, lit in harsh white light from my headlights. It stumbled out awkwardly, like it was meant to stand on 2 legs. Just like the one I'd seen in our backyard. The hind legs were too long, twisted and bent, and the steps it took were clumsy and uncoordinated. I hit the brakes. The deer stared back at me with unblinking black eyes. But the more I looked at it, the less it looked like a deer. The proportions were all wrong. The eyes were too big. The snout was too long. The legs were bent weirdly to accommodate being on all 4s. Even the antlers split and then rejoined again. Completely different from a normal deer's antlers. I should have just swerved around it. But I found myself staring, mesmerized, as it pulled itself onto 2 legs. At its full height, it stood around 8 feet tall, face outside the scope of my headlights, fur glinting in the moonlight. I gave them back, I screamed. I gave the rocks back. Not like I expected this thing to actually understand me. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened over the next 5 minutes. I was staring at it, and then I was speeding home through the darkness. I don't remember swerving around the deer. I don't remember if it tried to attack or stop me. I was staring at it, and then suddenly, I was speeding home. Horrible, sharp pain needled my abdomen. I let out a half scream as I stomped on the gas pedal harder, careening down the country road. The next day later, the bleeding started. I was having a miscarriage. And as I sobbed on the floor of my bathroom, I couldn't help but think that thing had made things even. I'd taken from the forest. So it took something from me.